Hello, people who were either sent a link to this channel or have just somehow managed to stumble across it. This channel is going to be used to upload my D&D group sessions as well as just a little bit extra if we have the time. The quality, of course, will not be the highest in the world as we are just starting out, and we are curious if we could actually gain an audience from doing something that we love to do in our free time. Now, some basic information. I'm the DM for this group. Um, this video will be a bit different than most of them as I will be the only one appearing in this one, and I'm going to be recapping the history that led to the story of the campaign we are currently playing, so that the major players are clear and that some of the overarching story is clear to anyone who finds this. Now, there will also be a video that recaps what has already happened in the campaign, as we have been playing for some time now. This will be a bit of a shorter video, but it will be out in a few days or sometime next week. This video that you are currently watching will cover the history of the past 50 years of Kronon, which is the main continent in our campaign setting, Draconias. Okay, the easiest place to start for this history is to look at what is the event known as the War of Men in Shadow. This war, the War of Men in Shadow, involved all three major political entities on the continent of Kronon: the Mokai Empire, the Aneron Kingdom, and the Khan Coalition. The beginnings of the war can be traced back to the day of the Terran Cycle trials. The Terran Cycle is the day of dwarven celebration of the elemental plane of Earth drawing the closest to the prime material plane. This celebration is mainly based in the Aneron capital city of Draka, which is a massive dwarvish city that spreads miles through Mount Aneron and into the ground below. On the day of the trials, the Smeltborn family challenged the Metalbeard family for the right to rule the Aneron kingdom. In the trial that followed, the Smeltborn family won the challenge, and Neris Smeltborn, the patriarch of the Smeltborn family, became the new king of the Aneron kingdom. This is the event that changed much of what could have and did in fact happen. When Neris Smeltborn took the throne, he was manipulated by an elven woman named Edelaine. She convinced King Smeltborn to turn the machine life program into something dark and twisted: the Warforged program. The machine life program was originally meant to take the soul of someone who was close to death and transfer them into a new body powered by both arcane and made of dwarven construction. Edelaine convinced King Smeltborn to turn this into a soldier program, which would create soldiers of steel, mithril, and arcane power that would be able to march across the continent unfettered by the forces of nature and man. However, Edelaine herself was a pawn of an entity called the Chained One, who was moving pieces into place over the continent of Kronon to create an army whose power the likes of had never been seen before on the prime material plane. During this time as well, an artifact had been delivered to Edelaine with little thought of who she was. She then put the King's Council to work on understanding the artifact. While research, sorry, so back up a little bit, clear that up to before while research. Um, the smartest of the 12 were put onto this project: Cerebos and Cyprivir, who were some of the first to undergo the machine life program before its repurposing. Eventually they began to open the artifact and discover the lore that was lost within the artifact. While this research began, the Warforged program began to create its army for the Aneron Kingdom. Soon this army began to march east across the Dinborough Peaks into the Khan Coalition's territory. When the first villages and towns were attacked, the army took the men to be inscripted into the Warforged program. In the invasion of the Khan, the Warforged army made it to Golis and Dalo, both cities holding out against the army, holding their walls sturdy, and even managing to push back the Warforged army ever so slightly. While all this is happening, deep below the surface, in the drow city of Adrazir, a matron mother by the name of Netrian Ilthazir was beginning to also listen to the calls of the Chained One. The Chained One promising drow supremacy and the delivery of an artifact known as the Eye of Idros to Netrian, allowing her to activate a ritual known as the Mandate of Chaos, which would render the surface of its magics, putting the drow in the seat of power on the surface. And in return, the Chained One would be given control of a drow army to be part of his unmatchable force. As well as another part of the Chained One's plan was unfolding in the far north of Kronon. A group called the Frozen Conclave ran a prison that held one of the most dangerous entities in the multiverse, an infection of the mind and body that would eat away at people's souls, leaving nothing but a monster behind. The Chained One began to manipulate a young man named Durak into having people follow him in his lead and begin the process of opening the prison that held the one-eyed tyrant of the Horde, an avatar of Galderos, a horrible entity that was born in the far realms. Eventually the Chained One managed to recruit all three parts of his army, the Warforged of Anaron, the Drow of Adrazir, and the Horde of the Far Realm. These forces met under Zoomfield, which is the capital city of the Mokai Empire, and was based on a floating island. Eventually, a group of heroes known as the Kronon Guard had been opposing the Chained One for some time. However, the group failed to stop the freeing of the one-eyed tyrant, but managed to destroy the Mandate of Chaos ritual before surface magics were removed entirely. Once the Chained One's forces had been gathered, the group who called themselves the Kronon Guard also worked together in an army to oppose the Chained Ones. In the final battle of this war, the Kronon Guard's army, with the help of the heroes, managed to defeat the Chained One's army, seemingly winning the fight. However, the Chained One managed to get himself, the Tyrant, and Netrion into Zoomfield, while the heroes were distracted with the battle down below. And in the time of this battle down below, the Chained One and his minions had enough time to kill 7 of the 8 royal wizards. Only Trinagon the Necromancer managed to escape from the Chained One and his minions. And the Chained One managed to deactivate the magical ritual that kept the island floating. As the heroes managed to make it to the island, it began to fall. Using a mixture of potions and magic effects, one of the heroes managed to catch the falling city and keep it from slamming into the ground. He would later become known as the Angel of Zoomfield. The 10 years following the War of Men in Shadow. Shortly after the battle above, as previously told, the Horde and Drow scattered, leaving only the Warforged army, which soon retreated to the city of Draco. Trinagon, being the only survivor of the royal wizards, decided to reanimate the corpses of the other royal wizards as his thralls, puppeteering their bodies to convince the people that they needed to destroy the Anaron kingdom. And with this knowledge coming from all 8 of the royal wizards, the people agreed. Trinagon then took his thralls and himself to Lord Zeno, the leader of the Khan coalition, and presented him with the same proposition, to which Lord Zeno agreed. Together they formed the East-West Alliance and began to gather soldiers and tactics to remove King Smeltborn from his throne. During the time the East-West Alliance was gathering their forces and planning the siege of Draka, King Smeltborn and his council began to mass-produce ideas to keep Draka fortified and prepared a larger Warforged army to protect the capital city of Draka. This led to the creation of what would become known as the Warforged Colossus, a massive warforged that was capable of leveling a city if given the chance. Eventually, the process of gathering forces and making alliances took 6 years, and eventually the East-West alliances gathered their forces and began the siege of Draka. They pushed their armies far into Aneron Kingdom lands and held Draka ransom. For the next 4 years, the army of the East-West Alliance pushed the walls of Draka, but to no avail. Eventually, the army managed to breach the walls with the help from one Darren Alexander, the former gunmaster of Draka, before the War of Men in Shadow. Once the walls fell, the army took the city, taking King Smeltborn and his council to be executed for their crimes. Shortly before the Terran bastion was raided, Ceravos and Cyprivir created false bodies to hold their place, and they fled Draka, avoiding capture, with a relic of a time long before anything that the world knew existed. The day came that King Smeltborn was executed for his crimes, and so too were his council members. After the execution, the Aneron Kingdom was split into 12 unique provinces that would be subservient to the Khan Coalition and the Mokai Empire, while Draka would act as neutral territory for the region. This grouping of provinces became known as the United Provinces of Kronon, or the UPK for short. This process took 3 years, and during these 3 years the Warforged souls were freed and their bodies dumped into the Kronon Ocean, just south of the port city Orion. The UPK. Once Trinagon and Lord Zeno split up the Aneron Kingdom, they decided they would appoint a magistrate to run the provinces in their place. In choosing their magistrate, they selected Darren Alexander, and he was told he could choose his successor. In the 6 years that Darren was magistrate, he managed to reopen the undercity of Draka and open several mines across the UPK in an attempt to restore lost value in the old Aneron currency. In this process, Magistrate Darren Alexander replenished much of the wealth of the UPK, while still tithing certain materials to Lord Zeno and Trinagon for an unknown purpose. After 6 years of Magistrate Darren Alexander, Darren decided he would step down from his position and placed his son, his oldest son, into the position of magistrate, Denzo Alexander. Denzo was a magistrate who, when he started, had few problems to deal with, but towards his later years of being magistrate, he has had to fight a war against the cold, evil crusade. And now he has had to appoint his brother to help him. Jason Alexander is now the spy master of the UPK and runs secretive operations in an attempt to sabotage the New Aneron's attempt at reclaiming the UPK for their territory. Iker Dragonsworn. After the siege of Draka, one dragonborn named Iker Dragonsworn was bound by word to a deity named Ortai the Conqueress. He began his journey across Kronon as an adventurer, and shortly after the formation of the UPK. In his third year of adventuring, his soul and mind were lit aflame by visions that showed Iker the ruler of a new Aneron and the king of dragonkind. Iker saw these visions of grandeur and decided that he alone was fit to rule. He found people who wanted to reform the old Aneron and return to the old ways. Once he organized this group of people, their numbers quickly grew, and soon Iker began to convert his followers into worshippers of Ortai. As the worshippers of Ortai began to grow in number, Iker finally began to take UPK provinces in an attempt to re-establish the Aneron, going by a new name, the New Aneron. He took his first province without having to draw his sword from his sheath. After taking the southernmost province, Iker gathered the people together and began his mass conversion of the populace to Ortai worshippers. Once the first province had been converted, he moved a force of considerable size south to the Contrinial coast and met with the seafaring court of Orion. In this meeting, Iker convinced the seafaring court to form an alliance with each other. The court agreed to this alliance as they were victims of a battle during the War of Men in Shadow and received no help in repaying the damages. The court sees Iker and the new Aneron as a chance to repay the debt of the old kingdoms. Iker was then given access to the Warforged graveyard off the coast of Orion. The first Warforged Iker pulled up from the ocean floor, gold plated with black steel arms. Beautiful gold filigree up the head. Icar saw the life that had been wasted by greed, and he took it upon himself to bring the Warforged back. He eventually repaired this Warforged, and had Ortai bless the body with new purpose and mind, creating Icar's second in command, the Advisor. A powerful cleric of Ortai and master strategist, the Advisor then began overseeing the process of repairing and refurbishing the Warforged from the ocean floor. Eventually this project was finished, all except the Warforged Colossus, which was transported to Icar's fortress in hopes that Ortai would bless the Colossus as she did the Advisor. Icar then began to pray and meditate on Ortai and her wishes. In this state, Icar saw several places: an obsidian ziggurat in the Dragonback Mountains, Bahamut's crystal palace in Mechanus, and Tiamat's pit in Avernus, and the king's vault in Draka. Icar decided to find the importance of all these locations, of their relevance to each other. In his research, Icar discovered the prophecy of the final conquest, in which a follower of Vortai would use the blood of both dragon gods, an orb of dragon kind, and the obsidian ziggurat to claim domain over all dragons. Icar has taken this knowledge and claims that his right to rule the new Aneron is divine proclamation, and that no one shall stand in his way. He has since had several projects running to find both portals to Avernus and Mechanus to retrieve the blood of the dragon gods. So far, a Mechanus portal has been located, and the Advisor created a tower over the portal to experiment and gain knowledge of how to harness the powers of Mechanus. A portal to Avernus has yet to be found. The Ortaian Crusade. Once Icar gained the support of the seafaring court and the first two provinces had fallen under his fold, he began a campaign to take back the territory that had been taken from the old Aneron kingdom, and soon the Khan coalition and the Mokai Empire realized what was happening. They began to support the UPK. Icar's army was soon halted just south of the village Florin, a small mining community that had one of the largest veins of the material used to power Warforged bodies. Before the involvement of the Khan coalition and the Mokai Empire, Icar had taken 6 of the 12 provinces, not counting the city-state of Draka. Now the UPK and the New Aneron have entrenched themselves just south of Florin. Neither have made more than a few feet advancement, the two clashing nations locked in a war for their ways of life and in the service of the divine.